Cool. So I think we'll start. First of all, I want to say welcome to this webinar on alternatives to using peat compost in your garden. I have a lot to pack into this 15 minutes, so if you have any questions during the session, please write them in the chat box, and we're going to be sending out a follow-up email with all the answers to your questions in that, just so that I can get as much information into this short, snappy webinar as possible. There you go, some questions. So, start with a little bit of an introduction. I'm Naomi. I'm part of the Wild Stockport team at Cheshire Wildlife Trust. I've spent the last year working in Stockport with residents, schools and community groups to help bring wildlife back to the town. I'm a very keen gardener and I'm really passionate about gardening, making gardening an accessible and multi-generational activity. So regardless of your age, your financial situation, or the size of the outdoor space you have, I believe that everyone can do a little bit to connect to nature on their doorstep and help wildlife in the process. A little bit about Cheshire Wildlife Trust. We are the county's leading conservation charity. We make space for local wildlife that is enjoyed and valued by all. We own and manage nature reserves, and we also work in partnership with landowners, local authorities to promote nature's recovery, as well as nature-based solutions to local, national and global problems. We work with local communities, helping everyone do more for nature where they live, from getting people outdoors and feeling better to protecting local wild spaces. We rely heavily on support and membership from Cheshire residents, so if you enjoy this webinar, I urge you to consider becoming a member of this great organisation. So, why are we all here? We're here to talk about peat and alternatives to using peat. So King of Gardening, Monty Don, has described using peat in your garden as an act of eco-vandalism. For years, gardeners have favoured using peat-based products for its ability to hold moisture and nutrients well as being cheap to source. Peat is a natural product found on peatland. Peatlands are amongst the most carbon-rich ecosystems on Earth, often presented as some sort of wetland. The waterlogged conditions prevent plant material from fully decomposing, and peat soil is formed by the partially decayed material, which builds up very slowly. In fact, it takes 1,000 years to create 1 metre of peat. That's about 1 millimetre every year. Healthy peatlands act as a fantastic sponge for carbon, soaking up an estimated 3.2 billion tonnes in the UK alone. But we are using peat at around 200 times the speed that it can reform. And so over 95% of British peat bogs, which are essential for a whole range of birds and plants, have been lost in this century. By digging it all up, we're releasing all of that carbon back into our precious atmosphere and destroying habitats and taking away our natural flood management systems. And the thing is, there are so many alternatives to using peat nowadays, so there's really no excuse, and that's what this webinar is all about. So, what can we do to go peat-free? The simple answer is to stop buying peat-based products, and an even better option is to stop supporting the shops that still do sell peat-based products if you can. We have a great resource on our website listing what suppliers are doing what. The good news is the legislation is coming in banning the sale of peat products for domestic use in May 2024 and for professional use in 2028. However, that's still a long time away, so we can definitely be doing our bit now until that legislation comes into place. Although there are a lot of peat-free products now available, it's still a relatively new thing, so quality will vary greatly from store to store. It may be a bit of trial and error before you find one that's perfect for you. I'd say if you want good quality, opt for brands such as Westland's New Horizon rather than cheap supermarket brands. Peat-free composts tend to be slightly lower in nutrients, so it's often recommended that you add other products in if you want to alter the pH or add specific nutrients to suit your plants. When looking for peat-free, it's important to inspect the back of the pack. Different graphics are used by different companies, and some will try and greenwash you by using different colours, such as green, to show a low peat content. However, they still contain peat. Peat-free compost needs to be 0 peat content, and they're usually quite clear on the packet that they're peat-free. Another option is to try and make your own compost. So, around 4.5 million tonnes of food is thrown away by UK households every year. That's enough to fill 38 million wheelie bins, or 90 Royal Albert Halls. The average family throws around £720 of food shopping every year. Home composting is a great way to stop certain types of food waste ending up in landfill. By avoiding throwing out food that could be composted, you'll save money on buying compost from the garden centre and help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here's some more stats for you. Food waste in landfill contributes to 8% of all greenhouse gases produced. If we composted all the suitable food waste produced by UK households, we could avoid the equivalent of 2 million tonnes of CO2 emissions every year. On an individual level, composting at home for just 1 year saves the same amount of CO2 that your kettle produces annually, or your washing machine produces in 3 months. Home composting is a great way of recycling our food waste while creating a rich soil improver for the garden. Your compost will be nutrient rich and will help improve soil structure, maintain moisture levels, and keep your soil's pH balance in check. So, how do you start composting at home? We want to start with a bin in your kitchen to catch all your compostable scraps. This should be a separate bin from a food bin you may use for other waste such as cooked food, meat or fish, as they shouldn't be composted. If you can, cut your scraps so they break down quicker. Try collecting a 50-50 mix of green waste and brown waste. Green waste is things that break down really easily. So on this slide, it's the things written in green. So that's fresh leaves, grass cuttings, young plants. And brown waste is stuff that takes a bit longer to degrade. So that's stuff like straw, autumn leaves, paper and cardboard, woody prunings. Some items, such as tea bags, coffee grounds, cut flowers, rhubarb leaves, are actually more of a mixture of green and brown. Next, you want to set up your composting site outside. So you could buy a container, you could build a heap using old pallets, or you could just start a pile in a warm, sheltered spot. You'll need a cover for it, so some cardboard or some carpet is great. If you've got a compost bin, then that will come with a lid. As your compost is breaking down, it's good practice to mix or turn your compost. The best compost requires access to oxygen, so turning it will help it break down more successfully. If you have room, it's a good idea to have 2 compost heaps, like in the third picture along. That way you can turn the compost into the other bin, freeing up the space to start a new pile. If you don't turn the compost, it's not the end of the world. It will still break down, but the bottom will be ready before the top. You also want to make sure your compost heap has some moisture, so it's not uncommon to water your compost heap during hot spells. And the final thing you need to do is wait. It takes 9 to 12 months for your first load of compost to be ready, and you'll know it's ready when it looks like soil. Now let's talk about some other alternatives. Wormeries. Wormeries are smaller than compost heaps. They usually consist of a stackable bin-like system. To start a wormery off, you'll buy a large quantity of worms. They usually arrive in the post, which is quite fun. They happily will live in your wormery, feeding off your food scraps and making compost at a quicker rate than a compost heap. Another byproduct of a wormery is the liquid that comes from your wormery in the little tap that's in that smaller picture. That is effectively worm wee, but it acts as a fantastic fertiliser for your garden. Next, we've got leaf mould. So when autumn approaches, you can use the fallen leaves as a good source of compost. It's fine to add them to your compost bin, but if you have large amounts of leaves, you might prefer to place them in a black bin bag and forget about them for the winter. They'll be left to turn into a brilliant source of moisture-rich soil improver that's great for use in potting mixes as a peat-free alternative, or you can use it as mulch around your garden, which will suppress weeds and retain moisture in the ground. Next, we've got green manure. I want to first dispel any confusion. Green manure is a plant, not a pile of smelly brown animal waste. It's called manure because of the effect it has on the soil. It adds nutrients in the same way that brown manure does. Green manure is effectively a ground cover that also acts as a soil improver. You grow it in a bed or an area of your garden or allotment where crops aren't currently growing. When it's done, you simply dig it into the ground and it breaks down. Green manures are the organic way to improve the soil fertility, including adding vital nitrogen, improving the soil structure, and providing better drainage. While it's growing, it suppresses weeds and it attracts beneficial insects to your garden. These plants are quick growing, so the process is simple. You sow, they grow, and then you dig them in. You can buy specific green manure seed packs from most garden centres. And some examples of green manure plants that will benefit wildlife are crimson clover, red clover, buckwheat, and phacelia. Next, we've got seaweed, comfrey, and nettle tea. So these are natural fertilisers used by many as a way of adding extra nutrients to your plants without using chemicals. The plant rots down in the water, releasing various nutrients as it breaks down. To make it, you want to forage your plants. You can use just one or a mixture, but do some research because each plant will create different nutrients. So work out what your garden needs. For example, tomatoes need a lot of potassium and magnesium. Comfrey tea provides potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Nettles, however, have a high level of iron, and tomatoes don't really like too much iron. Once you have your plants, pack them into a bucket and top with non-chlorinated water. So that's water collected from the rain in a water butt, or tap water that's been left out for a few days and the chlorine will evaporate. Stir it every day for the first week and then leave it. It will go really stinky, but that's what it should do. That takes about 3 months. Don't worry, that's just the stuff breaking down and the chemical reactions happening. And a bit later, the smell will dissipate, and that's when you know it's ready to use. It'll be really concentrated, so you don't want to use it straight on your garden. You want to put it into your watering can at a ratio of 1 part fertiliser to 10 parts water. And you can add the sludge at the bottom of the bucket straight onto your compost heap. The last thing I want to talk about is hugelkultur. I don't know how many of you will have heard of hugelkultur, but it's really simple. It's nothing more than making a raised garden bed filled with rotten wood. So it's great if you have a deep bed to fill and don't want to spend loads of money on compost to fill it. Your beds will be loaded with organic material, nutrients, and air pockets for the roots of your plants. And as the years pass, the deep soil of your raised garden bed becomes incredibly rich and loaded with soil life. Also, for the first few years, the composting process will slightly warm your soil, giving you a longer growing season. Plus, a hugelkultur bed holds a lot of water, so it's great if you have a particularly dry garden or yard, or if you have a raised bed on top of concrete. So, those are all of my recommendations for how to go peat-free in your gardens at home and to keep your gardens as natural as possible as well, while helping wildlife. I hope that was helpful. We'll send out this presentation along with the answers to any questions, so please check out the links, and we would love to see your progress and updates by tagging us in your social media. But for now, thanks for joining, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi.